This week on Writers, Inc.
In all my writing, I've always tried to avoid formula. I like books to be fresh, for each book to surprise my readers, and more to the point, to surprise myself. So when it came to book number 5, I thought that what I would do would be to just sort of muddy things a little bit, and to go from the first person, so I did this, I did that, I watched Hawthorne, I spoke to Hawthorne, to a third person where I'm not involved, so it's just Hawthorne arrives at the scene of the crime. In this book, he has his own sidekick. It's a cold case. It happened 5 years. And what this allowed me to do was simply to sort of, to jumble things up a little bit and surprise people.
J.K. Rowling was nearly homeless when she wrote the first Harry Potter book. Stephen King penned Carrie on a small desk wedged between a washer and dryer. James Patterson worked in advertising and famously crafted the Toys R Us theme song long before becoming an author. Join New York Times bestseller J.D. Barker and a panel of industry powerhouses as they pull back the curtain on some of the world's most prolific authors. Where did they start? What is their process? The biggest names in publishing all have origin stories, all have tips and secrets. What does it take to consistently top the bestseller lists and become a household name? Get your notepad out, school's in session. This is Writers, Inc.
Hi, it's Christine Daigle.
It's Jenna Brown.
Kevin Tomlinson.
And I'm JD Barker. Welcome to Writers, Inc. So I was going to ask our producer to splice in Total Eclipse of the Heart, but then literally every television show, every radio program has used that song in the last, I cannot listen to that song ever again. I don't want to discuss the eclipse. I'm very disappointed in the eclipse. But
I love, man, we had I'm in Austin, so we got full frontal. Got the full moon.
You got the whole deal, huh?
Yeah, it was amazing.
It was disappointing here. We've got a little a park right off the water here, and it was just packed with people. My wife drove out there with my daughter, and then I was on my run, so I just stopped there and I found him. And my daughter was up on there's this huge rock. Being in New Hampshire, there's granite sticking out everywhere, and there's this giant rock that the kids love to climb on and play on. And all the kids were literally facing directly towards where the eclipse was, playing on this rock. And I was just freaking out, trying to get my daughter to look in the other direction, wear her glasses or something, trying to be nonchalant about it. I didn't want to be the guy yanking his daughter off the rock or anything, but I don't want her to go blind, and I've got no clue how dangerous this really is. I just I'm 53 years old. Every time it happens, people drill into your head, don't look at it, don't look at it, don't look at it. And they're all just playing on this rock, smiling and looking up into the sky, and nobody went blind. So
sci-fi has taught me that this is where I'm getting the superpowers. So I was buck naked, front lawn.
Oh no!
Come at me.
Covered in radioactive
Thanks for
spiders.
That visual, Kevin.
Well, if you have the patience, in 20 years, it will be a full eclipse across the entire southern U.S. So you can come to Las Vegas.
Well, and if you are not opposed to flying, apparently in 2026 there will be a full eclipse in Spain, so you can go.
Yeah, I think it goes Iceland, Spain, Portugal, I think is the trajectory.
There's something in Australia too, because my wife mentioned in a couple of years she wanted to take a trip to Australia and see one.
Yeah, but see, everything in Australia is going to try to kill you, and so I wouldn't.
Yes.
I'm not tempting anything. Supernatural seeming events might trigger all kinds of apocalyptic things in Australia.
Yeah, even the cuddly creatures in Australia will kill you if they can. Yeah. Australia is no joke. They are a very angry continent.
So it's going to be a quokka apocalypse? Is that what you're saying? I'd like to see that fiction, the quokka apocalypse.
Yeah, what if they get superpowers from the eclipse? Become 30 feet tall, giant koala bears or something, just attacking the world.
Wow.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That would be terrifying.
Anyway, what is in the news?
Well, first up, I want to plug. I want my free plug, man, because
I heard you had a tremendous guest on this week on the Word Slinger.
A very special Word Slinger podcast episode, which by the time this episode goes live, that episode will already be live. So you can check out Mr. JD Barker on the Word Slinger podcast, and you're going to want to hear this one. This is a good one. So tune in. Wordslingerpodcast.com. Now, on to actual news. Storyverse launches groundbreaking mobile entertainment app that combines reading, animation, and audio for an immersive read-watch experience for digital native adults. HarperCollins has partnered with Storyverse, a new mobile entertainment platform that connects writers and animators worldwide, creating immersive animated content in a unique read-watch format available on iOS and Android. The platform aims to enhance the reading experience for digital native adults by combining animated video, audio, and text into visually rich and dynamic narrative experiences, covering genres like science fiction, fantasy, horror, mystery, and comedy. Initial collaborations include adapting content from the HarperCollins publishers and working with popular TikTok creator King Science. The platform has raised $2.5 million in pre-seed funding led by 500 Global, highlighting its potential to reshape storytelling for modern audiences. There was a Neil Stevenson book, I think, that had technology like this. Has anybody read that? I don't remember which book it was.
I have not, and I've got books with HarperCollins and haven't heard a word about this from them. So I feel I need to call somebody. Like I kind of want to participate in this. I've got a company that's been working on an augmented reality game. I wrote a story about a murder that takes place in New York City. So they've basically been creating this game that uses your iPhone camera, and you can go around the city and basically find and see clues using augmented reality. So you point your camera down an alley and you can actually see the murder scene, stuff like that. This has been going on for like almost 4 years. And now HarperCollins is coming out of the gate with this, which, might actually be better because it sounds like it's creating stuff on the fly. You don't have to actually go out there and shoot it and piece it all together. So it's interesting tech. I mean, some of the AI video I've seen lately is just insane. How good it looks. So this could be big.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm interested to see where it goes. And I'm if they're doing this, someone else is going to come along and do something that's a little more independent that, you just upload stuff to, and because we've already seen that on the AI front, like people are creating content and converting text to video and animation, stuff like that. So I think it's only a matter of time before we start seeing more of this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I agree. And I think when one of the big five jumps on, because they're so slow and careful and conservative with what they do, that this is probably going to be pretty big and not the last we're going to see of it. So it'll be interesting to see where it goes.
All right, next up, share and sell your books with Ingram Spark shareable purchase links. Ingram Spark's share and sell purchase links. It offers an innovative way to sell books directly to readers, enabling personalized pricing and promotional opportunities. Authors can create unique links for their books, directing readers to a dedicated purchase page. This feature allows for special pricing for different reader segments or for occasions like sales or gifts, simplifying direct sales to your audience. The links can be shared in various formats, including standard URLs, QR codes, and HTML embed tags, catering to different promotional strategies. Whether it's through social media profiles, posts, email, newsletters, events, or the author's website. Despite the option for discounted prices, authors have the opportunity to earn more per sale. The revenue is the price of the book minus the print costs and a $3.50 print surcharge fee, with readers covering shipping and sales tax.
This is cool. I'm trying to dissect it though, because first of all, I mean they're basically eliminating Shopify from virtually everybody who set up a direct platform in the last couple of years. But that $3.50 charge, like that actually could hurt a lot of people. Like my margins are pretty slim on my print books when I go directly through Ingram. I think I typically go in there and adjust them just to make sure I make at least $2 per book. So now if they're tacking another $3.50 on top of that, I'm in the red if I actually use this program. Which means my book prices have to go up if I actually want to do it. Cool idea. I got to do the math.
That's basically my entire margin for each print book. So
yeah,
I'm probably never going to use this because otherwise I got to raise, and maybe this is not a bad thing, but otherwise I got to raise the prices of my print books to something that is, well above average. And I don't know if that would hurt sales or help sales. I'd have to sell fewer books.
Yeah. I think, direct sales are so big right now. Everyone is trying to figure out how to give more opportunities for direct sales. I just don't know if as an author, this would be the one that I would use.
Well, is a consumer, do you think a consumer is willing to pay more by going direct to the author versus buying? Because like Amazon gets 50% off more or less from when they buy books that are generated by Ingram Spark. They get 50 to 55%, which is why if you look at your own hardcover prices on Amazon, they're, they could be $14, $15, $16, while Barnes & Noble, it's $29, $30. You're not going to be able to compete with that, unless Ingram decides to give you that same 50% discount. And maybe that's the answer. I mean, I don't know where that money comes from, out of whose pocket.
I think you could justify this if you made the direct sale version of this something unique and special. Like you could justify raising the price. So like, maybe it's got an additional note from the author or an additional chapter or, some bonus content or something that makes it worthwhile for the reader.
Oh, I think that's how Barnes and Noble started competing with Amazon. Is that when Amazon started like slashing the prices, like Barnes and Noble started getting special editions of books. So it's bonus chapters or different end papers or all those little details that diehard fans will go to Barnes and Noble for instead of Amazon. So that's not a bad idea.
All right. Next up, Meta stole everyone's books because it was cheap and convenient, considered buying Simon & Schuster, but that was unnecessary. This comes out of Publisher's Lunch. Meta, owner of Facebook and Instagram, internally discussed acquiring Simon & Schuster to access a vast array of long works for AI training, demonstrating the lengths big tech is willing to go to obtain content quickly and cheaply. The company explored various methods for amassing copyrighted material, including direct purchasing of books for $10 each for full licensing rights, significantly underselling the value of such works to authors and publishers. Legal and ethical concerns were raised internally about the aggressive acquisition of the intellectual property, including summarizing and using books and essays from the internet without permission, indicating a cavalier attitude towards copyright infringement.
Man, just when you need another reason to hate Mark Zuckerberg.
I mean, are we surprised though? Like,
No.
I mean, what did they do with Cambridge Analytica? Like, tricked people into giving up a lot of data through quizzes.
They're literally every company who's got one foot in AI right now is finding their little angle on how to do this. I mean, there's probably a conference room right now filled with people going, Meta just got in trouble for this, so we don't want to do that, but we could do this, and something just as horrible and more shady. Bottom line is this data is getting scraped left and right, whether we wanted to or not. We're kind of stuck with whatever the outcome of all this is, and there's very little we could do about it.
Yeah, there was a quote in the email from Zuckerberg that was something along the lines of when people were telling him to pay for it, OpenAI didn't pay for it, so figure it out.
Right. Yeah.
Wonderful.
All right. Yeah, let's use everyone else's bad behavior as a good excuse for us to exhibit bad behavior. I'm going to do that too. This whole thing to me is like it's an ongoing like Pandora's box. We're just watching. It's like, when around 4th of July, they sell these little, I don't know what they're called, but these little black cylinders, and you light them on fire, and then they just sort of grow into this giant worm looking thing.
Yeah.
That's what this is. That's what AI is. It's like someone set it on fire, and every time I look back at it, it's another 3 feet long. It continuously erupts, and I don't know what to expect now. It's just, I don't know what's coming.
No.
When you're writing a book, the first draft is the easy part. It's what comes after that hurts. The confusion, the self-doubt, questioning this, questioning that, trying to get feedback so you can feel confident making changes. It's a lot to handle. And that's why I'm delighted to say that this episode of the Writers Inc. podcast is sponsored by AutoCrit. One of the most value-packed memberships for any author, AutoCrit brings you an amazing suite of tools that can make it a breeze to plan, write, and edit your books all in one place. From start to finish, everything you need to produce a strong, confident story is at your fingertips. Get instant developmental feedback on plot, conflict, characters, themes, and more through the Story Analyzer. And edit each sentence to perfection with a complete interactive editing suite packed with reports and insights. And that's not to mention additional benefits like private community forums and live members-only support and writing sessions every single week. It's an incredible place to be for any writer. And listeners of the Writers Inc. podcast can take advantage of lifetime AutoCrit Pro membership for one single payment. That's right, no renewal fees. Head to autocrit.com/JD to get yourself a lifetime membership now. Big thanks to AutoCrit for sponsoring the show.
All right. So with that, JD, who is up this week?
This week, we've got Anthony Horowitz back on. He's the New York Times bestselling author of numerous novels, including several in the James Bond franchise. His latest is called Close to Death, and it's his 5th title in the Hawthorne and Horowitz series and releases April 16th. Here he is, Anthony Horowitz.
So welcome back to the show. For any listeners who may not be familiar with your work, you write both the Alex Rider and the Detective Hawthorne series, and you've also written for the James Bond and the Sherlock Holmes franchises. And your newest book, Close to Death, is part of the Hawthorne series.
That is absolutely correct. Well, when you talk about Sherlock Holmes and James Bond, of course, I work for the book side of it rather than the film side of it.
Correct. Yeah, you're writing for the estates, which
I write for the 2 estates, yes.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe you want to write a film because I know you also do TV and film.
I'm not so sure. I'm very happy with the book.
So I want to talk about this newest book. In this series, you write yourself as a fictional narrator who works with the police consultant, Daniel Hawthorne. And in this newest novel, Close to Death, you've written it as an argument between yourself and Detective Hawthorne while the book's being written. So the main character is arguing with you about what you're writing from beginning to end, which sounds like my worst nightmare.
It was something of a nightmare to write, I have to tell you. I had the idea and I thought it would be fun, but actually it was impossibly complicated to get it right because there are so many different timelines in it. And the secret of these books always is that the audience cannot be confused. The audience has to follow the story, and the readers have to know where they are, who everyone is, and in what timeline they exist. But here is me writing a book which is being published in 2023 about a case that happened in, I think, 2015, and Hawthorne is describing it to me several weeks or months or years later. So I got completely confused about where I was and what I was doing. And I don't know about the American version, but in the UK version, I've given a shout out to the copy editor who actually read the book and managed to untangle all the mistakes I'd made and make it all make sense. But it is fun because it is the first time, I think, that a character in a book has argued with the author of the book while the book is being written.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever read that before. So how did this come about, and how did you go about writing a book like this and trying to keep it all straight? I'd love to hear more about that.
Well, this is the 5th Hawthorne Horowitz novel. In which, as you correctly say, Hawthorne is the detective and I'm the narrator. And the first 4 had me sort of on the case with him, following in his footsteps, always worrying that if he didn't solve the crime, I wouldn't have a novel to write. And the 2 of us arguing and me making stupid mistakes, which in 2 books got me stabbed, and in another book gave away things to the killer. And and in a 4th book, I was even the main suspect. So there was a sort of a formula going on. But in all my writing, I've always tried to avoid formula. I like books to be fresh, for each book to surprise my readers, and more to the point, to surprise myself. So when it came to book number 5, I thought that what I would do would be to just sort of muddy things a little bit and to go from the first person, so I did this, I did that, I watched Hawthorne, I spoke to Hawthorne, to a third person where I'm not involved, so it's just Hawthorne arrives at the scene of the crime. In this book, he has his own sidekick. It's a cold case. It happened 5 years before Hawthorne and I met. So he's got his own sidekick, a guy called John Dudley. And I am merely now writing this book 5 years later and working, as you correctly said, with Hawthorne. And what this allowed me to do was simply to sort of, to jumble things up a little bit and surprise people. And, I hope you enjoyed it. I think that the book has a certain sort of freshness and a sort of a surprise quality about it, which is what I'm searching for.
Yeah, I of course enjoyed it, and it must be great fun to be one of the characters in your own book. I thought it was brilliant how you had Hawthorne holding back on the case and just giving a piece at a time for approval to keep that suspense. Yeah.
Well, I mean, one of the things that most pleases me about this book is that about halfway through, I go on the internet and research the murder and discover the identity of the killer and reveal it to the reader. And you think to yourself, how can you possibly have a whodunit when the end is revealed about 100 and so pages in? You know, doesn't isn't this the biggest spoiler ever written? But of course, then things take a twisty turn, and I'm very happy with the way the book actually does end. So it was enormous fun to write. It was complicated, but it was fun. And I hope that the people will find it fun to read, but not complicated.
Yeah, you twisted the twist. So I thought that was fantastic. And you mix your real life with fiction. So I don't know how you keep that all straight. I didn't know what was what. You even carry it into your acknowledgments, which made me laugh. I admit I Googled the agent, Hilda Stark. I'm like, is this a real person? I was trying to sort it out. What was what?
Well, my other agent, Jonathan Lloyd, is now known as Hilda in his agency. So I think our poor chap, he probably regrets the day Hilda Stark ever drew breath. But I'm glad you read the acknowledgements because I actually do get quite a buzz now out of writing humorous acknowledgements that aren't just thanking people, but which also have a bit of creativity thrown as well. And you know, what I'm trying to do is to produce, you know, whodunits that just haven't been done before, which are new and which are different. And you know, I've got ideas for the next two or three, and each time they make me smile, and I just can't wait to get back to my desk and start them.
Oh, that's fantastic. If you want to share about those next two or three, I'd love to talk about that, but you don't have to if it's going to be a spoiler. I'd love to hear what new things you have.
I will just mention that I have got a rather nice idea of a production company that decides to make a TV show out of the Hawthorne Horowitz books, which incidentally is sort of happening anyway. But they come along and they start shooting, and all I know is that the actor playing Hawthorne is murdered. So what I then have is Hawthorne investigating his own death, which I think is that makes me smile anyway.
I don't know if I can wrap my brain around that, so I'll have to see how you pull that off. That sounds fabulous. So, if I could, since we're geared towards writers, you write a lot in Close to Death about being a writer, and I'd love to get your take on that outside of this fictional world. If what your fictional Horowitz says is actually your take on that. Um, so you write that if you're going to spend your entire life writing, you have to accept the possibility of failure and live with it when it arrives. And there's an old saying, you're only as good as your last script, but that's not true. Writing's all about looking ahead. You're only as good as your next one. I'd love to get your take on that.
Well, I think it's true. I mean, first of all, most of the things that the Anthony character in the book says about his life and about writing generally are true. I mean, he is me, and he is, I think, pretty accurate to me. And that those things you just said are true. I am very forward-looking. I do think that you have to accept the possibility of failure. I have written plays which have been unsuccessful by any yardstick. But do I regret writing them? Of course not, because they're part of my journey, part of my career, and part of my growth as a writer. And if you just fear failure so much that you just write the same book over and over again because that's what seems to work, isn't that all going to get a bit boring after a bit? And that idea about, you know, the script, you're only as good as your next script, I've already said to you that with every book I write, I'm trying to make it better than the one before. There's no point in just, you know, looking for the paycheck and writing a nice, easy book. I'm always wanting to shake it up and surprise the readers, surprise myself, because I've always said that writing is an adventure. It's a journey. It's an experience, and every single book is a step on that way. And I love the fact that I you know, I've gone from writing children's books and Alex Rider now to murder mysteries, and I have other books in my head which are different again. And that to me is the whole point of writing.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. I love, you know, your enthusiasm, not writing the same book, looking forward. Um, you talk a lot about the pressures of delivering a book on the deadline. I think, yeah, at one point there's a Christmas promise of a book he hasn't started writing from his agent. What does that look like for you? How do you handle pressures of deadlines?
Well, I'm pretty good with deadlines, actually. I mean, they are sometimes quite wearying. I mean, I'll give you a very good example of what I'm writing at this very moment as we speak. We have made Magpie Murders for television, which is done by Masterpiece PBS,
Yeah.
and we've also made Moonflower Murders a sequel. And the producer, who happens to be my wife, had suddenly announced she wants a third television series, which starts shooting next January of next year, which sounds like a long way away. Believe me, it isn't, particularly as it's an adaptation of a 180,000 word novel that I haven't written.
Right.
So that's a deadline to write a huge novel. And then the day I finish it, to start writing the screenplay, all in time to start shooting it in January of next year. And that is sort of terrifying, but at the same time, it's quite sort of, I'm sort of vaguely excited about it. And I'm happy to describe it to you, because even as we began this conversation tonight, I was just approaching the 90,000th word of the book, and it's going well. So it's sort of, deadlines can be stressful, and they can be scary, but I think they can also be very inspiring.
Yeah. So you don't let the pressure get to you. It's just motivating for you then to hit those
That's
deadlines.
right.
That's great. You do talk a bit about imposter syndrome and kind of how, having a multiple book deal is great. Your books are going to be on the shelves, but it also ties you, to a particular path and a particular publisher. You're kind of their full-time employee. I'd love to get your feelings on that.
But it's a conflict between security and having a security blanket, and having the responsibility and the stress of delivering. My publisher is after one book a year now, which is,
Mhm.
and sometimes I think to myself, can I really do another book? Can I really? I sometimes feel there's a lorry with sort of a million words that keeps shoveling them over my shoulder onto the page. How many more words do I have to write before I'm done? But what you talk about, the imposter syndrome, I think all writers have it. I certainly have it. I mean, I am now getting on. I've written something to the order of, I think my next book will be my 60th novel.
Wow.
And yet, even so, as I speak to you now, Close to Death comes out in the UK in about 2 weeks' time, and I'm nervous. Are
Mhm.
people going to like it? Are they going to say bad things about it? Are they going to say it wasn't as good as the one before? It is somewhere in my head is a feeling, hey, it's a terrific book. My publishers like it. You've said you like it, and my wife liked it. But you never know. William Goldman, the screenwriter, the
Yeah.
greatest American screenwriter of Butch Cassidy and so many other marvelous movies, said the most significant sentence in the whole world of writing. And I'm sure you know what it is. Nobody knows anything. And those words have stayed with me for life, because you literally do not know whether you have a hit or a flop until the book, the film, the play, the picture, whatever it is, comes out to the public. And only then do you find out.
Yeah. Yeah. And then when you've had so much success, each one, you feel that pressure to keep having success.
Well, I mean, what is success? I mean, I wonder. I often, again, something I've said is that, the only, the big difference between a successful writer and an unsuccessful writer is your room gets a bit bigger. You start earning a bit of money and you get a bit of success, you can get a bigger room and maybe a more modern computer, but nothing much else changes. And I have this idea that success is always just slightly unattainable. It's always the next book. It's always the next one that's going to be the big one, or, the next opportunity, the next film, the next something. And it's always just around the corner and you keep struggling for it. So I'm not entirely sure I even know what success is.
I think that's fair enough. And
Maybe
I think,
talking to you and being asked about my books, that's a sign of it.
oh, there you go. That's success. Well, I do want to ask about your books because in the book, you say that you're not a fan of locked room mysteries. So I'm curious if that's the truth. And if so, why that is and what your thoughts are on those.
Well, again, I say it sort of in the book, and it's quite fun
Yeah.
that actually in the middle of a book which contains a locked room
A locked room
mystery,
mystery.
has a couple of pages to tell the reader why he doesn't like locked room mysteries. And that's sort of part of the fun of the book. But it is true that I do find some locked room mysteries, as I say, just a little overcomplicated. Murder stories are not about murder, and they're not about ingenious ways of killing people or ingenious ways of escaping justice. What they are about is character. They're about people who are angry with each other or scared of each other, or in fear of each other, whatever it might be. And that's why I like writing murder mystery. Like in Close to Death, you have a group of people who all live in the same private residential close and for different reasons come to hate the same person in the close. It's a nightmare neighbor story, and that's very human. We've all been there. I'm sure I certainly have lived next door to a neighbor who has caused me grief, and I'm sure you and many of your listeners will have too. So you're writing about truth. And when you come to a locked room murder mystery in which somebody, shall we say, disguises themselves and then, maybe plays a tape recording of their voice and hides, and finds a secret passage and changes the clock faces so that it reads the wrong time, etc., 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 you're not talking truth. You're not talking character. You're talking something else. So look, I love all murder mysteries pretty much, particularly Japanese ones, which include an amazing number of insanely clever locked room mysteries, but they can be, to my mind, a little bit dry, a little bit too clever, and a little bit too unreal. And so that's why I put that sort of couple of pages in.
I get that. So maybe the writer's trying to be a bit too clever instead of really
Sometimes.
immersing
Look,
you in the characters, and maybe.
I think that modern writers are smart enough not to do that. I think that there are, back in the sort of, the day of the golden age murder mysteries, there are a number of books that I have found actually quite hard work, simply because the writer gets carried away with his own or her own cleverness.
Yeah. Yeah. And you talk about characters, and I know the last time you were on, you said that you are an immersive writer. So you like to immerse yourself in the world, smell what they smell, eat what they eat. What sort of things did you do to get immersed in Hawthorne's world for this book?
Well, the funny thing about that is that I didn't so much because Hawthorne is an enigma. He's a mystery. And I'm much more involved in trying to find out what has made him the man that he is, what happened to him in his childhood. And I do that through the Anthony character in the book, who is always searching for further clues. And in this new book, In Close to Death, does get to know a little bit more about him and discover who he works for. John Dudley has connections with his past as well, the new assistant, or rather the old assistant. So the character is forever searching for the truth about Hawthorne. But I, as the writer of these books, 5 of them so far, only know what the readers know. And that's not an awful lot.
Yeah. You did say that you lived in Richmond in your acknowledgments, but I don't know whether to believe that.
I can assure you that everything I write about myself in the books is true, and I do indeed live in Richmond. And if you were to come and visit me in Richmond, I could walk you down the river, the 15 or 20 minutes to Riverview Close, which is very near to me, and which is where this story takes place.
Nice. So did you do any walking or thinking about setting and how to immerse in that world, or is it just so, yeah?
Of course, yes. I mean, the book is set in Richmond because I am in Richmond, and it's obviously easier for me, therefore, than to write about, I don't know, somewhere I've never visited. And the bookshop that the 2 ladies have, I could point to exactly where it is in the Richmond village where I am and say, there it is. It isn't because I made it up, but I sort of know it intimately because I know the area.
Yeah. Okay. I like that. Yeah, so only Hilda is a lie. Everything else is true.
Even Hilda is not entirely a lie. She'll be calling you up to complain that you said that.
Oh no. Does anyone actually call you Tony?
Funnily enough, the only person who calls me Tony and gets away with it is my son. My youngest son has been calling me Tony since he was about 15. And at first I was a little bit shocked by this, but now I rather like it. And
Okay.
he can get away with it.
That's fantastic. You talk a little bit about notes, and I know as writers, we all get notes from other people, and you talk about notes from producers, directors, actors, editors, copy editors, and trying to see the alternate point of view. How do you do you get a lot of different notes at one time, and how do you manage seeing the other point of view with kind of just trusting yourself?
Well, first of all, because I'm married to the producer of the shows that I write, that helps me a little bit. It doesn't help me in the sense of giving me more power or control, but it does help me in the sense that she will make sure that the notes all come sensibly packaged, and so that the more sort of outrageous notes never reach me. What happens is that everybody puts their notes into a pool. I get them all at the same time. But what I always say to writers, especially to young writers when I'm talking to them, is it's one of the hardest things you have to decide, which is, you've got a producer who is investing $10, $20 million in your work. and they've got a note, which is they don't like this character or this scene or this piece of action or whatever, or they want something more or whatever. And you have to say to yourself, well, do I agree? If I don't agree, is this worth fighting for? And or is it, if I don't agree, that I can somehow fight back and maybe make them change? Well, at what point do I stick my feet in and say no, I won't do this? That's a balancing act. And when you're a young new writer and you're slightly nervous of your producers, you don't want to upset them by saying no. But at the same time, if the note you believe is going to make the show worse, it's your duty almost to yourself to say so. So look, I think writing TV and film and books is a largely collaborative process. You don't fight, you don't have to lose your temper, you don't have to get angry. But I do think there are times when you have to know when to say no and when to say no, I want to keep it how it is. But at the same time, there are also lots and lots of times when you have to say yes, absolutely, you're right, I'll do it immediately, especially if you're married to the producer.
Yeah, you want to live in the same house.
Exactly.
You also talk about one thing that you've always feared is getting to the end of the book and realizing you didn't have one, and about how much time you've wasted on a book that would never be published.
But that's only the Anthony in the books that worries about that, because when I'm writing my books as the author, know everything before I start. I spend an enormous amount of time working on the sort of the mechanics of the book, the scaffolding, the sort of structure. I have a notebook which I write everything down in, every single clue, every single beat of a story, and I have a pretty good map of the whole thing before I begin writing.
Have you ever had a book that you worked on that you realized wasn't a book, or have you always been pretty meticulous and never had one that didn't work?
I think because I work so very hard, and I'm so tired now a lot of the time, I just don't have the energy to start a book, write 50,000 words, and then realize it's going nowhere. I have to be pretty certain that a book is worth writing before I commit the year or the 2 years of my life that it's going to take for that book to come out. So it hasn't happened yet. I mean, look, I'm not saying that every book I've written has been perfect and brilliant and marvelous. Sometimes I've written books that I've looked at afterwards and sort of been annoyed with myself, and I hadn't spotted something or hadn't taken a different direction. But I've never ever given up on a book halfway. I mean, it would just be too awful to throw away 50,000 words.
Yeah, it would be. I felt that pain, and I was hoping that had never happened to you.
You've had that happen to you?
No, I have. Well, I mean, I've written books that I'm obviously not published, but I think they work. They just didn't publish. So I think that's a different thing.
That's another question.
That's another question. So we talked a little bit earlier about success, and you think that's something that's always kind of out there, but you've written, as you said, 60 books. You've influenced many other writers. Do you ever think about how you hope your work influences future writers?
No, not really. I think that my duty, my role in life is to entertain readers. That's sort of the whole thing, really. I'm writing books that I want people to enjoy reading. I hope that they won't guess the endings. If they do guess the endings, I take my hat off to them, and I'm happy for them, annoyed for myself, but happy for them. And I like my books to be well written. I try to use good language and for them to be truthful and to be decent, and for there not to be unpleasant violence or horrible scenes in them. And I know my role in life is to be an entertainer, and that's really all I want to do. As to influencing other writers, I'm a great believer in helping writers. If young writers want advice from me or want to meet me or want me to look at their work, if I have the time, I will do that. I've done it many, many times, and I'm proud of the fact that I have, I think, influenced some writers and helped them in some ways. But that's a sort of a happy side effect rather than a sort of a plan.
Nice. Okay, and as we're just coming to a close on time here, I just wanted to ask you one last question. If you could give one piece of advice to other writers about how to engage in immersive writing, what would it be?
It's simple. I mean, first of all, don't necessarily take advice from me, because advice is dangerous. Every writer has their own rules, and that the best thing to do is to follow your own rules and your own instincts and not listen to writers like me. But I would just say this: There are two ways of looking at a book. One is to stand outside it and look at it as an object which you are creating, which has a market, which has readers, and which is going to sell so many copies and make you this much money and might have a sequel and etc. etc. The other way to do it is to write inside the book, where all you're interested in is not the audience, not the royalty check, not the publishers, not anybody except what the characters are doing, what you're hearing, seeing, smelling, feeling, what is around you. It's like when I put on those Apple goggles that somebody gave me the other day, and suddenly I was in a completely new world. That to me is how I write. And so that, I'm not sure I'm giving advice here, but that is the way I like to write. And if you're asking me to give writers advice, I would say get inside there. You use the word yourself, immerse yourself. And I find that is the easiest and the most rewarding way to write.
Okay, so I'm curious. Have you ever had multiple timelines in your books and got confused while you were writing? And if so, how did you handle that?
Oh, I'm going through that right now. So I've got my 4MK series. The 3 books are already done. Like that trilogy's been out for years and years now. I'm writing 3 prequels right now at the same time as writing 1 sequel. So I went back and I listened to the audiobooks for the 3 originals to get it back in my head. And I've got all 3 of them are sitting on my desk right now because I have to keep referencing them, and trying to keep track of those characters when they saw what the first time and things like that is very, very tricky. But I love Horowitz just for that particular fact. Like he is willing to just challenge the hell out of himself with each book. And honestly, like they are so much fun to read. Not only as a reader, but also as an author. Like it's one of those books where you read it, once for fun, and then you go back through again with the highlighter going, how did he do this? And, try to unravel it. He's a very, very smart guy.
And this was an interesting one because he did a cold case, which is a challenge. Have you ever done a cold case in one of your books? Like something that's already... That's
not one of mine, no.
That's hard.
Sounds fun. I mean, it sounds like if I ever want to put myself through hellish work, that's the way to go.
I don't think I've written a book where only one person dies. I tend to kill a lot of people and very, very brutally and in your face. So I like the idea though. I've got a couple that are on my little master list of things I want to write that would be considered cold cases. One of them is a murder that dates back 30 years, and it bounces back and forth in time. The time when it happened and then present time. Sooner or later I will get around to doing it, but I haven't done it yet.
And you would fictionalize this? Like you wouldn't try to do like true crime. I mean, you would.
Yeah, I've done as a ghostwriter. I've done tons of true crime, and it's easy and it's fun to a certain extent because when you're doing true crime, you've got police reports, you've got court transcripts, you've got interviews, you've got a lot of material you can rely on. The trick is to keep it from being dry, right? You have to make sure that narrative is enticing and something that people want to listen to. You don't want it to turn into a long essay from a high school student, which is a lot of true crime books kind of feel that way. But yeah, but you can write them very fast, I guess is what I'm getting at, because you have all the details, you know exactly how it played out. You're not making any of it up.
I'm reading Eric Larson's Devil in the White City, and what's kind of amusing about it is like and I'm not through with the book yet, so I don't know, exactly how he's going to tie all this together, but he's interwoven not just the story of that Holmes guy and his murder spree, this serial killer, but the whole like birth of the Chicago World's Fair and the architects who were involved and that sort of thing. And so it's sort of, he leans really heavy on that stuff. So if you pick this up to read about the serial killers, you might be disappointed, but I kind of want to skip all the serial killer stuff and just read all the all the stuff about the architects.
One of my personal favorites is I'll Be Gone in the Dark by Michelle McNamara.
Yeah.
There's an HBO documentary, and it's mainly because it's very personal. Like this whole story was very personal to her, the way she wrote it. You feel like she's telling, sitting you down in front of a campfire and telling you this story. And I think that's why it works. When the narrator gets so detached that they don't really feel like a person anymore and they're just spitting the facts, like that's when I feel it breaks down.
Yeah, and I think how Anthony made it work is that he interspersed the cold case third person past chapters with first person, with him as, the narrator, just sort of getting the facts piecemeal, which was a really smart way to do it. Another interesting thing he did was he revealed who the killer was early, like very early, which is so hard to pull off. And I'm curious what you think about that.
I mean, I think yeah, that is really hard to pull off, but it is sort of, I guess the difference between, kind of writing like those mystery books versus like thriller books is, you kind of know it's not about like catching them before it's too late. It's sort of about like figuring out why it happened in the first place and kind of unfolding it that way, which is a different journey, but can be a lot of fun to read and go down that path and kind of unravel all those clues.
Well, just taking the genre and turning it on its head, I think, is why that works. I did it in Fourth Monkey, the opening chapter of Fourth Monkey. The killer's been killing people in Chicago for years, and his mode, he mails a box to the family whenever he has a new victim, and he gets hit by a bus in the opening chapter and killed, walking to a mailbox, so he basically just killed somebody. But the police still have no clue who he is. They have no idea who he kidnapped. So I've got plenty of mystery there to still play with, and I guess that's the trick. You have to, you'll need a new twist. You need something that nobody's seen before.
Yeah. You go from who done it to either why done it or how done it, and all those are perfectly viable ways to tell a story.
I really liked what Anthony said about, keep looking ahead, keep writing something different, keep pushing yourself. He always wants to write a different book instead of writing the same book over and over. So how do you do that, or do you like to write the same book over and over?
I could never write the same book over and over again. Even now, writing these books that are happening in the same universe, the way that I'm approaching each story is very different. The way that I'm dealing with the characters is different from the way I did in the past. Once I fall into a pattern where I'm doing the same old, then I'm bored. I know the reader's going to be bored, and nobody's going to want to pick it up. And I think it's really important to challenge yourself. And he keeps coming up with new ways to do it.
Yeah, I agree. I like coming up with different ideas. Like I have a few that I just know I'm not going to be able to tackle yet, but they're there. They're there. They're waiting. They're percolating.
Do you like being tied to multiple books with the same publisher, or do you prefer to have a scary, more uncertain?
I would love to be tied to a publisher in any way.
My publisher is such a hard ass.
Oh, isn't that the truth?
Again, I've got friends that are in that particular boat. They're 5, 10, 15 books into a series with the same editor, the same publisher, and to a large extent, they're phoning it in, right? Like Lee Child was a great example of that. He his real name is Jim Grant, which everybody kind of knows. It's on his Wikipedia page. Lee Child was just one of the many pen names that he tried, and that one just happened to land. People really resonated with those Jack Reacher books, but before you know it, he's 20 some books in. You're writing the exact same story. Basically his entire life revolved around like he bought his computer, started it on September 1st, like every single thing. Like there's nothing new or fresh about that. And now he's sitting on a porch somewhere in, I think, Montana, completely retired from the industry, because he got tired of it, and he couldn't write anything else. It got to the point where those books were making so much money. I'm sure if he went to his publisher and said, I think instead of a Reacher book, I'm going to write this. And if he did that, the entire industry would have imploded. There's just too many people, too much money at stake to be able to do that. I mean, Dan Brown's another example. I mean, he would probably love to write something other than another Robert Langdon book, but he has to. People are expecting that to come from him. It's too big of a business.
But there are people who are pulling that off. Like I interviewed James Rollins forever ago now, but it was right at the point where he was putting out a high fantasy book after doing all these thriller novels for so long, and his Sigma Force books, and that book's done. He's done 2 or 3 of those now, and they've all done very well. And it's because he has an audience that was willing to follow him, take the risk and follow him. And he still puts out his thrillers, but I think it is a risk, and maybe that would deter the publishers. That is an advantage, I think, when it comes to self-publishing. Not that there's a battle here or anything, but I mean, there is a kind of advantage in that if you I decided at one point, I shifted from publishing sci-fi to doing thrillers, and everybody who was following me on sci-fi, I'm going to say everybody, let's say 90% followed me over to the thrillers. And then when I put out another sci-fi book, or sometimes I'll do something really off the wall, they buy it, they read it. So that's actually the core group that I've been trying to attract anyway. So
Yeah. It's interesting. I read that James Rollins book, The Fantasy, had not read any of his Sigma. So I wonder how many, like if there's a new audience that he got with that as well.
I bet he
Although
did.
Yeah, the fantasy audience is smaller.
Nora Roberts does that. She has.
Yeah,
I think
didn't she start
juggled
writing fantasy
three
too?
different. Yeah, she does the romance. She does fantasy, and I thought there was a third one.
She
in there,
does
but maybe-
JD Robb, isn't that her
Yeah,
pen?
yeah, she
Rob,
does
yeah.
thrillers.
Yeah.
Yeah, so she tends to navigate that. I do wonder if there is like a sweet spot in your career where you can like sort of branch out a little bit, and if you try it too early or too late, maybe that's what happens. You get kind of stuck. It is interesting to think about.
Yeah, we've talked about that before. It's best to mix it up as early as you can so people understand that it's coming. And the other aspect you've got to really look at this, particularly if you're dealing with traditional publishers, is your contracts. Because like I had a contract when I sold Fourth Monkey that specifically asked for another book in that series. They called out the characters, so like I had to write that. I've got a friend who wrote, her name's Chelsea Kane. She wrote a really cool series, and then she lost her editor after turning in one of the other, like a new book in that series. And because the editor was gone, the publisher didn't put out the book, so the book basically ended up in limbo. She wasn't allowed to put it out because the publisher owned it by contract, and as far as I know, it was never released. And that kind of thing happens a lot. With me personally, I signed a 2-book deal for the 4MK series, and when the third one was done, I indie published it. They had the opportunity to buy it. I turned them down, and I went ahead and indie published in English, and then sold the foreign rights. Because for me, that from a financial standpoint, that was the right way to go. Now I'm writing these 4 other books, and I have no publisher technically attached to them. So we can take them out and shop them. I can put them out through Simon & Schuster. I could put them out some other way. I like having that particular freedom, and I'm very careful with my contracts to make sure that I'm able to do that sort of thing, because you can easily get roped in and get stuck just by one sentence buried 5-10 pages in.
Yeah, and we've talked about that before, but you think those things can't happen to you, but they can. So make sure you understand your contract.
Yeah, and bring someone in who not only knows contract law and knows how to negotiate that, but is on understands your goals. Make sure that you bring someone in to look at all that stuff, because it's easy to sign those papers, man, when you're like, this is my dream, this is everything I ever wanted, and then because I lost my first book. I had a trad pub deal, and I ended up losing that book for like 4 years. I mean, it was a struggle to get that back, and it's never seen print. I've never even bothered. So you can put yourself in a bind.
Yeah.
JD, I got a question for you, man.
Sure.
Because you say you're writing like these 3 or 4 books at one time. Like, how are you juggling that? How are you like picking a day and this is book 1 and then the next day is book 2 kind of thing, or what are you doing?
No, it's more about when I get stuck. So the 3 prequels that I'm writing, I'm pantsing 100%. I don't know how I'm going to end them. Like I know they have to dovetail into basically where the Fourth Monkey starts. But that's covering years worth of data. So I'm working on those, and then the sequel one I actually outlined because it's a lot more intricately plotted, and the storyline it has the same characters but doesn't really fall into the same storyline as all these other ones. So I was able to do that. So I basically I work on the pantsy novels primarily, and then when I kind of put myself into a corner where I don't know where I'm going next with the story, then I bounce over to the other one and maybe spend a day or 2 or 3 days or whatever working on that, long enough to figure out where I need to go with the other one, and then I jump back again. And it's all staying fresh enough in my head, where I can keep track of what's going on where.
That's going to present an interesting opportunity when those books are out, because now someone could read, one of your pantsed books and one of your outlined books written at the same time.
Yep.
And see, and compare and see what the tone and everything is like. I'm going to do that.
Well, one of the other, you probably will. I'm sure I'll get a bullet pointed list. One of the other things I honestly want to do with those is I want to take the 3 books and put them out either on the same day or very, very close to each other. Mainly because, like when the 4MK series came out, like I turned in all 3 books, but they released them 1 year apart. And, you know, like people were freaking out, especially at the end of the second one, because I literally ended that book with to be concluded. Like it was halfway through the story and people had to wait a year in order to get the next piece. And I don't want to put fans through that. So I want to somehow drop all 3 books on the same day. And I don't know that a trad publisher would be willing to even do that. Like, I know I can do it through my Simon & Schuster deal, which is awesome. But like in my ideal world, I would come out with a box set, you know, that literally drops all at once everywhere so people can get all 3 books at the same time. Who knows if that's going to play out, but that's the current thinking.
That's interesting. One of the other things I thought Anthony said that was interesting is he said success is unattainable. It's always right around the corner.
Yeah. I agree with that.
Think that's absolutely true. Yeah.
I think it should be that, because the whole point is like once you get to the top of the mountain, like there's no direction you can go but down unless we live in a much different universe. But the idea is like you want to be continuously going forward in a path of success. The point is never to reach the mountain. It's always to be on the journey. And you acquire things as you go. If you start looking at like a hero's journey kind of thing, like you pick up the companions and the resources and the magical items, all that stuff happens during the journey. Once you get to that pinnacle, the journey's done. And that's why so many people will like succeed, by whatever worldly standards they have and go into depression and, they don't know what to do. They have to reinvent themselves because they quote succeeded.
Isn't that like an ancient saying too? Like the master should always be the student, something along those lines. Like, which I think ties into that. Like you can't ever be like, I'm done, I've made it, because I think
because you'll be done.
Well, right, yeah. So you should have something else that you're always kind of striving for.
Whenever this conversation comes up, I always think of Gillian Flynn and, picture her at home right now trying to write the follow-up to Gone Girl. And we interviewed her on this show, and I'd have to go back and look, but I'm guessing it's 1.5 to 2 years ago now where, we talked to her about that. And that follow-up book still isn't out. So just imagine that kind of pressure. You're so much better off in this world or the music business, if you can just kind of come out, and I don't want to say be mediocre because that's not really the right word, but like you don't want to hit something 100% out of the park and then have to chase that for the rest of your life. It's almost better, to be a B student, just puts out really solid product over and over and over again. Just build that back catalog. Your bank account steadily increases over time. It's not being led by any one particular book. It's being led by 10, 15, 20 books. I think is the better approach. But obviously we have zero control over any of that, how it plays out. You just have to go with the flow. But just from what I've seen, if you could look back on people over time, like those are the most stable career-wise, the people that have that. I mean, Jeffrey Deaver is a great example of that. He's got a huge back catalog. He never really had a huge hit other than maybe Bone Collector at the very beginning. But he's got a ridiculous audience at this point, and it's just because he's been just trucking along one book after the other, just putting them out.
Yeah. There is something about knocking it out of the park quickly. You get that paralysis. This is probably depressing, so I don't know, we can cut this. But I was thinking about, Kurt Cobain. And people think he's just this cool guy, but he was like a music
genius
and made his band practice 10 hours a day and, not the cool. And he, when he's like, I'm done. I did it. What am I going to do? Another quiet, loud. Like I've got nothing else. And nobody wants to be there, right? So he's like, I've worked really hard and I did it.
That is sad too, because that sort of thing really bothers me, because it's sort of like saying that, I've peaked and so there's nowhere for me to go, instead of saying like, I had a phenomenal, success and hit it out of the park. Now I have to reinvent myself and do, that's the way I see it. It's like, luckily, I've got a whole career of mediocre, unknown books, and so when I do hit, I've got a back catalog that will hopefully, be great. But even if the next book I release was to become like the book that just reset all the records and set me up for life, and that's the only book I'm ever known for or whatever, like my goals from that point forward would still be like, I don't know. I'm not going to chase that success. I'm going to chase new success. Like I'm just going to create a new path. I think that's the problem. Yeah, people.
Yeah, do something different.
Yeah, do something different. That's the FU level, right? Like you can now start writing your fantasy books, or go full Brandon Sanderson or whatever you want to do at that point. You don't have to care. And that's the way I'm going to look at it. It's like, okay, my mega bestseller is a movie, and it's a TV series, and I'm making millions on it. And so now I can literally write whatever I want, and nobody can tell me otherwise. That's the way I'd go.
Huh, sounds great. Okay. And with that, JD, who is up next week?
Next week, we've got CJ Tudor coming back. CJ burst onto the thriller scene back with her debut novel, The Chalk Man. And she's followed that up with hit after hit after hit. Her latest novel is called The Gathering and releases April 9th. So she's going to tell us all about it. CJ Tudor.
Yeah, it's going to be great. If you'd like to be notified as soon as new episodes publish, make sure you go to writersincpodcast.com and sign up now. We'll see you next episode, and have a great week of writing.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Writers Inc. Access the show notes and leave a comment at writersincpodcast.com.
He was a football star, an American Idol, but behind the fame, a twisted tail did